If you have listened to conversations surrounding Web3 and blockchain, one of the core topics that comes into this discussion is why is this industry still has not achieved mass adoption? That's why this conversation with Rushi Manche was really helpful for me to understand the current status of this industry and where this industry is heading. Rushi is someone with systems engineering background, now created a company called Movement Labs. Movement Labs aims to refine blockchain infrastructure through the Move programming language by focusing on security, user experience, and enhanced developer experience. One of the reasons why this industry is struggling from an adoption perspective is that every year we lose around 2 to 3 billion US dollar due to hacks. In that state, we cannot expect this industry to achieve mass adoption. That's why this conversation with Rushi helped me to understand why EVM and even Solana virtual machine lacks the fundamental capabilities that could drive this industry to mass adoption. So without further ado, let's dive into this conversation with Rushi. Welcome to the conversation, Rushi. How are you doing?
Doing well. Thanks so much for having me, man.
Thank you for taking the time to be here. So could you please introduce yourself to the audience?
Yes, I'm Rushi Manche. I'm co-founder of Movement Labs. My background is engineering. So started my career in distributed systems, working as an engineer within big health insurance companies, essentially migrating their on-prem databases to cloud. So I've always been interested in distributed systems as databases and kind of how can we store data in a better and secure way. Got into crypto of 2.5 years ago, I want to say, and really fell in love with the engineering side. It was the first permissionless, kind of open source way to publish smart contracts, publish financial data, to distribute ledger, and really be able to scale enterprise applications. This was around when Cosmos was picking up and this app chain thesis was picking up. And the idea that every app, every network can have their own independent chain and customize their validators. That was very interesting to me coming from a traditional engineering background. I want to say August of last year, I stumbled across Move and I was like, Facebook, the biggest social network, the biggest consumer app, biggest use case that we're all vying for, looked at crypto, looked at Web3 and was like, we need to build a better solution to house our millions of users, potentially billions of users. And of course, they built the Move language, they built the DM program, which I'll get more into later. And I became one of the first engineers in the space. And eventually led to me building Movement Labs, the modular Move-based network of blockchains.
You started Movement Labs like a year back, I guess, right?
We started the idea like November, I want to say last year, but picked it up over Q3, Q4 last year.
Okay. Like your motivation is to fuel the adoption of chain-based tech with a better programming language, with a better VM than what exists right now. Looking at the current landscape of blockchains, that EVM is the most prevalent and
Yep.
Solidity is the most prevalent programming language. Like what you hear from the Ethereum community is that, okay, EVM is going to be the most adopted. EVM, it doesn't really have any other competitor. Like this is going to be the VM and Solidity is already adopted. But it's not the case because you have all these hacks happening.
Yep.
Every year we have almost like $3 to $4 billion hack, and it's unprecedented in any other industry that you lose so much money. What's your thought on the argument that EVM is the go-to VM and Solidity is a go-to programming language?
I think the common response I give is like, I hear like, oh, EVM has won, EVM has done this. I ask, won what? Like, there's like 20,000 developers that can write Solidity. In the grand scheme of things, compared to Web2, when you have tens of millions of JavaScript developers, in reality, it's a very small portion of the pie. In fact, it's like saying like PHP already won or like Linux kernels already won. It's a very that's the first iteration of technology. It brings the first few users, but it clearly can't scale. Like you touched on, it's $4 to $5 billion every year in hacker attacks. If you're ever going to get your mom or your sister or your average retail users with a few $1,000 using Web3, using DeFi, using GameFi, using these strategies, they want to be able to trust that they can put their assets and their net worth into secure vaults, secure DeFi strategies, and not get hacked. And B, they want to be able to have insurance. So when you go into Web2, if there's a pretty good chance, like if you're investing in a bank, if you're investing in any one of these financial institutions, if something happens to the bank, you're usually covered by insurance, you're covered by the government. There's a lot of like safeties. In Web3, that's not the case. If you get your JPEG hacked, if you get your app hacked, you're screwed. So it's difficult for insurance providers to cover the full assets for LPs and liquid funds. So what we're seeing with Move and other generic VMs is that with next gen VMs and formal verification and all these security benefits, A, you're able to create strategies that aren't getting hacked for billions every year, and B, you're able to get insurance fully on these vaults and strategies. And the second thing is on the performance side. We've all seen like the parallelized EVM narrative kind of kick up, and even like the OG EVM folks like Stani, like some of the Paradigm folks are looking at how can we parallelize the EVM, how do we modify the database, how do we modify access lists, stuff like that to really make that UX better. But the thing is that like it's very difficult to do that in the grand scheme of things. It'll take like years for those AIPs to be adopted. Like pro-dang sharding is years out. So if we want to see actual adoption within the 1 to 2 years that we all buying for, it seems like the EVM, or at least the old EVM, is not the choice. There's obviously a few groups like Monad who have really taken a charge with the brilliant parallelized EVM and they're going to kill it. But it seems like everyone agrees that generic EVM won't scale.
Oh yeah. And yeah, it has scalability problem as well as security problem. And could you give for the audience to understand more better, like what is Move programming language and what is Move virtual machine? Because it seems like there are like a couple of versions of even Move
Yep.
virtual machine with AppSui and M1. So could you break down that concepts a bit more?
Yeah. So the idea and the project started in the Facebook days. I want to say like 3 years ago. Facebook was looking to enter the metaverse. They wanted a stable coin and kind of financial system within Facebook, so you could send money between different users on the app itself. So they started experimenting with crypto. They looked at the EVM, saw it was broken, saw that if they were to do 1,000, 2,000 transactions, the EVM Ethereum would not handle it. So they looked at, okay, we need parallelized runtime, but more importantly, we need secure parallelized runtime. In this world, we're housing billions of dollars of user funds with billions of users, with heavy regulations from the United States and major actors. You can't have your vaults and can't have your strategies getting hacked. So ultimately, Facebook decided we need to build our own programming language. That started the Libra project, the DM project, whatever you want to call it. And that started the original DM style Move, which has parallel processing, can notch 146,000 TPS, can do all the benefits that you're seeing in Solana, and these other parallelized runtimes. But really the focus is on formal verification. Think of Solana VM and your favorite auditor combined into one VM, built into one VM. That was the thesis behind Move, the fastest and most secure VM designed to handle millions of users on chain at a given time. Because of regulations, the project was shut down and kind of pivoted into two projects, Aptos and Sui, which most people probably heard of. Aptos was more of the generic DM style, got to market first and built their brand. Sui and Missing Labs kind of iterated upon it and built Sui Move, which is more of a DAG style consensus model. They have a different way they handle the Sui Move itself with object oriented model and the different account structures compared to Aptos and Sui. But long story short, it is essentially two variants of Move. You have Aptos Move and Sui Move. You can think of it like React and Vue.js, which are two different versions of JavaScript. And now what we're working on is kind of unifying both sects.
So you also have built also like a layer 2, like M1. That is also using Move programming language, right?
Yep. So we're building the first Move layer 2 on Ethereum. So you have MoveVM for execution, Ethereum for settlement, and leveraging Celestia for DA. I like to say like 2023, we saw the rise of all the DA layers, right? You had Celestia, you had Eigen, you had Avail. And the thesis there was Ethereum DA is very expensive. It costs 80% of fees, 90% of fees. And if you ever want to build Accrual on Ethereum, that won't have the issues that Arbitrum and zk and all these folks are. You need to have better DA solutions. And this year, what we're going to see is a lot of these folks are realizing the EVM shouldn't be and is not scalable. So providing alternative DA layers and alternative VM layers is what the modular thesis is really about. So within the modular thesis, we're able to bring the best elements of every side. So bring the best VM, which is the MoveVM, the best settlement layer, which is Ethereum, and then right now the best dealer on market, which is Celestia.
So in that, like in your MoveVM, which version of Move are you using? Like there's Aptos version or the Sui version of this MoveVM are you?
So the underlying VM is the DM style of virtual machine. So it's
Mhm.
more like Aptos.
Mhm.
We're fully EVM compatible as well with the transpile we built. Get more into that. It's an EVM runtime on top of the VM.
Yeah.
We also support SweMove because we added SweMove bindings and a SweMove runtime to the virtual machine itself. So we support Aptos Move, SweMove, and EVM end to end.
So basically, any apps that has been implemented in Aptos or Sui or EVM can be moved to this particular layer and
Yep.
get the security of the Move VM. Okay.
Yep.
From a developer perspective, like when you first looked at Solidity as a programming language, what was your feeling from a developer perspective? Or because it seems like we have, like I read through you have this famous Electric Capital report about a developer adoption. We're clocking around 16,000 active developers. And if you look at the broader scheme of things, you have around 20 million active developers for all other languages combined. And this is a very minute number of developers participating in blockchain development. How easy is to pick up Move as a programming language compared to something like Solidity?
I started as a Solidity developer, and it was a very frustrating experience coming from a Web 2 background. Obviously, developer resources were limited at the time, as with any new language. But for me, it was very difficult to debug the code. The issue with Solidity is a very slow velocity of production. Now, let's say I have a great new idea, I have a social app. In Web 2, I could ship it within a week. So like we saw like Mark Zuckerberg, he shipped Facebook, got a prototype up, got users up within a week in his college dorm room. What we're seeing right now in Web3 is if you're building the EVM, you're deploying, let's say, a social app or a gaming app, you deploy to mainnet, there's a very high risk that even if you do obtain users within a week or two, you go viral, you get all the benefits you want, now you have eyes on you, and you probably didn't spend the hundreds of thousands of dollars the auditor fees require. You probably didn't spend tens of like unlimited hours debugging your code, looking for vulnerabilities. You just don't have the time to do that in a very competitive, fast-moving social and consumer app environment. So it's very difficult to ship code quickly. That was my biggest frustration because, yeah, you can build a DeFi, you can take a year, 2 years, raise capital, build runway, pay auditors, and then deploy mainnet. But it's very difficult to deploy a mainnet product within a month and have it secure. Compared to Move, you essentially have the form of verification built into the VM itself. So let's say you're building a social app like what Stars Arena was. If Stars Arena started off that project in Move, they wouldn't have to deal with the registry bugs that ended up crippling the entire social app. Because the VM itself formally verifies, essentially does a job of the auditor in runtime, it'll say, hey, this smart contract is bugged. There's a registry vulnerability, there's a flash zone vulnerability, there's like calls that haven't been taken care of, there's integer overflows. It checks for that before it executes. And if there are any issues, it'll stop at a runtime and flag that to the user. Whereas an EVM and traditional Solidity code, it'll just let it go by. No one's going to realize it until a hacker from a different country like pokes through and takes your entire protocol revenue. So I think that's the main user experience. In terms of the language itself, the analogy I like to say is Move is to Rust as JavaScript. Move is to Rust as React is to JavaScript. So it's a very specialized version of Rust. It's pretty easy to pick up. When we've done a lot of hackathons, we've done a lot of work in universities. It's very object oriented. It was obviously built by the biggest social network in the world and designed to have user experience and developer experience in mind. So I would say it's traditionally easy to pick up. And in terms of actual developer experience, it's markedly better.
Oh, yeah. The way I understand the core idea of Moment Labs is to push the adoption of Move as a programming language and MoveVM as the most prevalent VM in
Yep.
the blockchain space. How are you going to? What's your plan on achieving that goal? How are you going to push that? Considering that you have this very high, because it seems like the capital in crypto is a bit sticky. It's
Yep.
not easy to move around capital from Ethereum because of the bridges and whatever. So how are you going to overcome all those limitations to make this the most adopted language or VM around?
So the way we approach is twofold. Obviously, we live on Ethereum for settlement. So native ETH works out of the box. We're like fully EVM compatible is the second part, which so that means any Solidity code can launch. We'll transpile the code down to move bytecode and launch the VM itself. So you have all the benefits of parallelization, full verification, embedded within the VM itself. But on top of it, we essentially have Fractal, which is the first EVM to move runtime environment. So we're fully end-to-end compatible with MetaMask. It works out of the box with Ethereum JSON RPCs. Any like remix IDEs or Ethereum tooling works pretty out of the box. So it works, talks, and looks like an EVM. Under the hood, it's a MoveVM. So we're doing a lot of BD. What we're focused on is attracting EVM projects, Arbitrum, Optimism, Ethereum, Polygon, these core protocols, and saying, look, you can just copy paste your code, live on Ethereum for settlement, and under the hood, you'll have all the security benefits of Move. You'll have localized C markets, so you have like a Solana-like feel. It's a much better user experience for your folks. So what we're seeing right now is a lot of these bigger protocols that have never expressed interest in going to Aptos, Sui, or these other Move chains or these other Move networks can now natively deploy on top of us because they're seeing it's a way to deploy onto a next-gen VM without the burden of doing it. I think Stani pointed this out, and a few of the Aave folks pointed this out. They're actually looking at deploying on top of Neon EVM, which is essentially EVM runtime on top of Solana. The key proposition there is they want all the benefits of Solana. They want the parallelization, but the overhead of deploying Solana, hiring Rust engineers, even when you talk to like the Aave DAO members, it's like if you have different smart contracts, let's say you have a Rust-based smart contract, EVM smart contract, Aave is a very like huge protocol where if there's a smart contract issue on one end, it's a chain reaction and it can cripple the entire network because it's a lending-based protocol, right? So with that, they want to keep standardizations, deployments, and usually will in the short term only prefer EVM deployments. So that's why we prioritize EVM compatibility and attracting the liquidity that prehistorically has always been sticky.
To break down the concept a bit about this single-threaded execution environment and like multi-threaded execution environment, like parallelizable VMs. I saw your tweet. You pointed out the fact that there was a not more than a couple of thousand users can use even Arbitrum or even layer 2s at a single time because the fee spikes, it destroys the UX. But there was an airdrop recently in Solana, which even through a heavy usage time, the transaction fees were pretty stable. To better understand the concept of single-threaded or multi-threaded, like parallelizable VMs, could you just break down that concept a bit?
Yep. So single-threaded VM is a situation where you have to wait for each transaction to finish. So let's say you have 1,000 transactions on like Arbitrum or Optimism. Right now in single-threaded environments, you need to wait for each transaction to finish. So A to B, B to C, C to D, E to F. It's like pending on the transaction before you, which is very problematic, especially in times of when network usage goes up. Let's say you have 10,000 transactions that want to be queued. A lot of these times, these transactions will fail. Gas fees will spike because the demand for the block space increases. So if you have 10,000 transactions competing for block space, it's probably going to jack it up to $100+, which makes it virtually useless. The parallelized runtimes enable you to not wait for transactions to execute. Instead, you can execute asynchronously. So say you have 1,000 transactions, you can execute all at the same time. You can issue optimistic finales in some cases. In other cases, you store the local state. But essentially, you're not waiting for a transaction before you finish. There's a few different patterns. Since we have introduced the block STM pattern, which is probably the best version of parallelization in the market. Monad is also a version of that. They call it like Monad BFT, which is originally from the DM BFT concept. But essentially in that market, you have localized fee markets where you're not waiting on transactions to finish. Instead, you can execute 1,000 transactions at a time, and there's no kind of discrepancy in fee markets, and the gas fee always stays stable. So that's why when Solana had the big airdrops, the fee and the UX was relatively the same. I think the biggest use case was during inscriptions. When the whole inscription crazy, and it's still going on right now, pretty sure every EVM chain went down. And those that didn't went down, the fees were like literally $100, $200 to the point of where like, if I want to send $1 from me to you, it would cost me $100 to send that, which makes it unusable, right? Whereas like Aptos, Sui, Near even, and a few of these different groups were able to fully handle all these transactions up to the point where it was like 10,000, 20,000 TPS being observed without breaking a sweat.
I think the market is slowly waking up to this reality that this new concept in town is like parallelizable VMs, and Solana is leading the charge. Compared to what Solana has, how is MoveVM different from SVM. So what are the core advantages of MoveVM compared to SVM and even WASM VM?
On the technical side, MoveVM employs parallelization a little bit differently. They have the block STM pattern, which is the parallelization engine. Solana uses Turbine engine. Both are very good parallelization methods. Honestly, they're not similar to TPS and theoretical. I think it's both like 150K plus. Solana obviously has a lot more research behind it or usage behind it. It's been more battle tested in real time. So there's things like Fire Dancer and Tiny Dancer, which are independent third-party inventions that should, in theory, scale like client support for Solana much better and, in theory, increase TPS. In terms of speed, both of them are pretty good. They're 1A, 1B. They can handle the 100,000 plus users in theory. The only difference that is like starkly notable at the moment is the security advantages. Solana still has a lot of security vulnerabilities. We've seen a lot of major scale hacks happen on Solana network, especially during times of high usage. This is because even though it's Rust-based, and it is much more secure than Solidity because it's Rust-based, obviously, it doesn't have the formal verification built into the VM itself. So there's still a lot of overhead for developers who want to write in Rust. They still need to make sure real-time bugs aren't possible. They still need to check for the same things in Solidity. So the velocity of production is still very slow, as well as like it's not fully secure. On the Move side, it blocks around 95% of all attack vectors we see. And we're working on scaling up to 100 as any company is. So essentially it's MoveVM is SVM plus your favorite auditor, both into runtime. So MoveVM focuses more on security side while inheriting a lot of the security benefits, the performance benefits of Solana VM. WASM VM is very interesting. There's been a few different iterations of it. There's like Multiverse X that does a WASM VM that's more of like aligned with like what Solana VM does. It's like parallelization. Not too familiar with their tech stack and kind of what they've done. There's a few different groups that are doing ZK WASM, like Fluent. I don't think they focus more performance side. What they do is they focus on universal programming. So it's also like Operation Stylus. Basically, say build whatever in whatever language you want. So they support TypeScript, support JavaScript, sling JavaScript contracts on Ethereum. So the thesis there is attracting new developers to the ecosystem. Whereas Move and SVM are more focused on the parallelization side, on the high throughput side, and Move itself is the only VM focused on formal verification and security side.
So why is formal verification very important? It makes it like the base concept is like it's mathematically provable that the code
Yep.
works as expected, but can't you do that in Solidity or even Rust right now? Because you write programming languages in Rust on Solana.
Yep.
Where does the difference come from?
So if I'm running Solidity or Rust, I usually pay an auditor $100,000, $200,000 to do formal verification for me. What that means is that they'll go into each smart contract, go line by line manually, and say like this line is fine, this line doesn't work, this line caused an issue, and produce a report. That's very slow. Obviously, it's expensive, takes months, and it still doesn't work. We saw Kyber go down very recently, which is like a blue chip protocol, over $1 million to put in auditing. It's a blue chip protocol. Curve went down, the DAO went down. Every week there's a new attack. There's like NFT trade last week, something like that. And the thing with that is like the Kyber attack was a 0.0000001% like attack vector, which is just human error. In this world where you have millions of users on chain and you have much more eyes on these smart contracts, it will not scale because you have much more TVL, much more liquidity on chain. It's more attractive for developers to kind of scope in. And clearly there's very small attack vectors that auditors can't pick up, developers can't pick up. And the numbers, I saw this on Twitter another day, 90% of every DeFi protocol, including blue chip protocols, have vulnerabilities and will eventually be hacked. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So the concept of formal verification is to issue at runtime. So when you're executing a smart contract, it says, hey, is there an integer overflow? Is there a type mishap here? What's going on with the smart contract? Is everything good here? There's also less opcode, so it's a much smaller way to go wrong. But I think the main value prop here is in this world where you have an app and you're pushing 100+ commits every year, and there's constantly code changing, it's virtually impossible for a developer or auditing group or anything to stay on top of formally verifying every smart contract in every line, in every instance. There's going to be human error no matter what you've seen. That's literally why Kyber went down. And we had a Kyber dictator almost take down Web3, right? With Move, that's not functionally possible because every time you update a smart contract, every time you update new code to mainnet, checks at runtime, which is why we haven't seen any hacks on Aptos and Sui, knocking on wood, and haven't seen any large scale attacks recently within the ecosystem.
That makes total sense. We need developer adoption and UX improvement for user adoption. And for that, you need the sense of security, what actually is not there right now in the EVM space, which is the biggest ecosystem right now. And like user adoption also need to come from like the user experience, like something like wallets. Like these things exist only in the blockchain space. And if a regular Web2 user start using a blockchain, you need to go through several different steps that they are not used to, or it is the barrier to entry so high for the user. When I stumble upon the concept like CK login, what Sui implemented, that feels like what user may accept as the right
Yep.
barrier to entry. What needs to happen there to get adoption from the user side?
I think the fundamental principle is that users can't know they're using blockchains. Like for example, when you're on this call right now, when we go on Twitter, there's TCP IP running in the background. There's a bunch of internet processes that have been 50 years plus, hundred millions of dollars in research. But you don't know you're using these things, right? You don't know what the internet is. You don't know how Bluetooth works. It just works. Same thing with these consumer apps and these. The end game for blockchain is that it just works in the back end. It's the world's first and best distributed ledger. It's privacy focused. It's open source, stuff like that. That's kind of the end game here. So on a user point of view, that means you don't even know you have a wallet. So Sui ZK logging is pretty transformative, in that you can just log in with Google. It creates the wallet for you in the back end. If I want to send money from me to my dad who can't generate a wallet for the life of him, or anyone like that, they can just send money and it'll like send it to account and he can redeem it without needing to have it on wallet. So things like that is a very good user experience, better payment solutions, stuff like that. And then when we go towards like security side, obviously for liquid funds, and people who want to deploy capital into DeFi strategies instead of deploying to like S&P 500 and conventional stock markets, what's very important there is security. Because if you're a liquid fund, if you're a private investor, you want to calculate what's the ROI of your investment. Yes, you have APYs. Yes, you can project in the models, but smart contract risk is obviously a very important factor. How can I make sure that if I'm deploying $1 million into a DeFi protocol, that it's not getting hacked and my LPs aren't going to yell at me the next day? Right now, and even talking to countless liquid funds, it's virtually impossible for any liquid fund to obtain full end-to-end insurance for any DeFi strategy. Maybe besides like Lido and a few other folks like that, that have like proven to be impenetrable, but they're not really. But long story short, there is like EVM strategies have been very difficult to obtain insurance for. But with Move, with the enhanced security, now these liquid funds and family offices and private investors can ensure end-to-end security. It's something we're working on with a few insurance groups as well. And then on the UX side, obviously, like the low fees is transformative. Like we're seeing Solana DeFi kind of go crazy. All the meme coins go crazy. The reason why it's going crazy is developers are seeing like, or users seeing like, if I want to buy a meme coin, I can not have to pay $50 in gas. If I have, let's say, $500, I can put $50 into 10 meme coins. Instead of Ethereum, I can maybe buy 2 meme coins because like it's $100 in gas when things go crazy. So that localized fee market is extremely low fees. The slick UX that Solana Suite provide, and eventually will provide, really attracts users and keeps them there. And obviously like the whole meme coin cultures and what we're seeing with Solana crazy, obviously helps.
Yeah, it seems to be the case. And because something like that needs to happen for really people to trust the system and use it. As of now, it's a lot of it's hard to do stuff on Ethereum L1, and like even $2 or even like 10 cents is too much for someone from a South Asia or Southeast Asia or even from Africa side. Like they won't be using it. It's just so
Yep.
yeah, that definitely needs to happen. And going to the concept of modular versus monolithic blockchains, which is because you are building M1 based on Celestia, data availability on settlement on Ethereum, and using MoveVM, which is compatible with the Move version of Aptos and Sui and also EVM. So that seems like a lot of flexibility that you get by using that kind of model. But if you look at something like Aptos or Sui, These systems are pretty much this traditional monolithic concept where one platform does everything. So if you look at these two ecosystems right now, where do you think the space is moving? Is it like more like a monolithic where you get everything, or or you use something like Modular where you leverage the decentralization of Ethereum, such as secure settlement layer and cheap DA from Celestia, and the flexibility that you get from a VM like MoveVM where you implement it on M1?
Yeah, so I think in the short term, there's space for both monolithic and modular chains. So the benefits of monolithic chains, I would say payments. If you're doing a payments app, it's best to do in Solana. It's the easiest user experience, low fees, like out of the box, don't need to worry about different layers. I think where modular stacks and kind of what we're building provides more benefits is on DeFi side, you can have much more innovation happening. For example, I was building the first DEX in Aptos, and the biggest issue I had was I had two assets on my protocol at the time because this was when I was first starting off. And they weren't exactly the most sought after assets on the new chain, right? Whereas if I deploy the same DEX on my layer two, which is movement, now I can native ETH into my protocol. I can have Bitcoin bridge directly. I can have EVM assets, EVM liquidity, which allows me to be much more friendly towards new users. Obviously, like Ethereum is much more speculated upon compared to like Aptos assets back in the day, and even today. So I would say it allows for permissionless innovation on the modular side, whereas monolithic side is more ease of access. That's the short term. So in the short term, we're going to see obviously Solana and Sui and Aptos really crush it on that side. But in the modular side, you have folks like us, you have folks like Eclipse, folks like Fluent, really pushing the innovation side of Ethereum. Everyone kind of sees that Ethereum in its current state won't really scale to the point that we want. But the modular thesis is how can we leverage the current liquidity and user base that's still very sticky liquidity on Ethereum and scale it. So that's why different DA layers for different fee structures, different VMs for different use cases. And yeah, that's kind of where we're getting at. And then eventually the end game, I believe, is this kind of like, I think Santiago pretty well in that you kind of have this unraveling of different tech stacks and you kind of put it back together when it comes. So the best modular chain will eventually be a monolithic chain in that all these kind of different tech stacks will come together. You have seamless APIs, and the best experimentation chain will just work, talk, and look like a modular chain, but will come from modular backgrounds. That's how Web 2 worked. You had experimentation on internet protocols, and even your computer, you have different hardware structures. But eventually, it's like the best PC was the one that just came out of the box. So that's kind of the short, long-term vision.
And value accrual is also a part of the conversation when you think about monolithic and modular part, because block space, how Ethereum block space is valuable, and that value accrues to the ETH token. That is a strong part of the narrative, and that economic security part gives the settlement even more, make the settlement even more powerful. But ultimately, layer one tokens are very similar to meme tokens in a sense that's all about narrative and it's all about the trend, what's happening right now. If you look at Solana, there is not this scarcity and value accrual coded into that particular token compared to something like Ethereum. But when the trend goes on the other side, even if it's not such a scarce asset, you see the value appreciate. So it means that the narrative plays a big role. So in that sense, where do you think, like in your system, you're settling on Ethereum and Celestia and having your own blockchain. So where do you think the value will accrue in this kind of modular model where it's very simple to think about like monolithic blockchains or Solana?
So I think the true business model here is at the VM level. Obviously, like DA layers have a lot of hype, but in theory, like let's say for example, like the transactions are cent, 2 cents. DA layers are capturing very, very small percentage of that. For each transaction, it's like 0.000, like negligible, right? Obviously, like this narrative stuff that drives token price action, that's a different story. But on the VM level, you kind of customize what the fees are charging users, right? So with the parallelized runtime localized fee markets, our fees are next to nothing, like 0 point whatever. So we have a lot of flexibility on like different fee markets, how we're charging users, obviously keeping it very low. On the token side, without actually seeing myself right here, but there's different models that you can employ. For example, like a decentralized sequencer, something we're working on is because we come from the Snowman consensus, we can actually use a token to secure the sequencer network. With other rollups like Arbitrum and ZK Sync, when there was high network activity, the sequencer went down. The issue with that and like bringing it to next gen VMs is the thesis is you're gonna have hundreds of thousands of users on this thing. So you can't have your sequencer going down constantly. With that, we're gonna be able to roll out a decentralized sequencer. You have 100 plus validators. They're all staking moved to participate in sequencing the network. It's very similar to the Celo playbook, where the Celo validators all stake Celo and power the Ethereum rollup. So I think that's a cool value cool mechanism that no one's really explored and done recently. Is that there's a way for you to still have your own validator set as L2 despite living on Ethereum. And that comes to sequencer level. And then obviously there's a lot of fee markets that you can do with the VM level to make money off gas fees.
Oh yeah, got it. Is there how much can you decentralize at a sequencer level? Is it like will it be like a BFT like model where the like, set participants are like 100 maximum 100 participants? Is it that kind of decentralization or how can you define because decentralization is actually like the way to achieve something, but sometimes it's also defined as we need like maximum decentralization. So how much decentralization is decentralized enough?
Yeah, so the Snowman consensus from Avalanche is probably the most decentralized, one of the highest Nakamoto coefficients on the planet. In that it's very low minimum hardware requirements. So unlike Solana and these other networks, to run a node, it's like you can run it on any laptop or sometimes even like your iPad. So low hardware requirements, low minimum stakes. So you just have to stake our native token. We'll have pretty low minimum stake there. So anyone can participate in sequencing the network. And eventually it'll be permissionless. So we're not tapped 100. It's a DAG-based consensus. So you can do, in theory, 500 or 600 plus, which we'll eventually get to later. But yeah, with the Snowman consensus, that's the thesis behind choosing that was extreme decentralization. Having anyone able to run their own validator to participate in sequencing. And yeah,
do you think these models were like Aptos and Sui is bringing this real innovation on the VM side, and also with concepts like secure login and intra-validator sharding and stuff like that? But ultimately, the number of participants is limited to around 100. So do you think that would be a hurdle for such blockchains with very limited number of participants?
I want like in the short term, I want to say no because the average retail user doesn't really care about decentralization that much. Like if you look at actually the centralization holdings of different like Ethereum, Solana, these different groups, it's not the best at times. So the retail user usually doesn't care that much. In like a 100-year landscape, yes, it's important. For regulation wise, if you're running actually a government network, it has to be decentralized, having thousands of nodes. So eventually decentralization is very important. That's kind of the Espresso, Radiant, these different groups, their thesis behind decentralized sequencers. But in the short term, I don't think it's like something that users care about or even know about most of the time.
Oh yeah. Okay. Got it. And this question is more like where the trend of engineering, because this question is more pointed towards what you observe as a builder. Because if you look at all the things that we use, which is software based, most of them, and if you look at the latest AI trends, most of the companies are based in Silicon Valley, and the like this like developing this software engineering solutions seems to come from a particular geography, like mostly US based. If you like you are working on MoveVM, which is basically comes from the Silicon Valley. So do you think
Yep.
that this geography is going to be the main place where innovation comes from for now? Or do you see any other trends where, cool things come from other geographies too? Like places like Singapore or Dubai and stuff like that.
The beauty of crypto is that's truly universal, right? It's truly international.
Mm.
Asia has done a great job of like kind of cementing itself as like a hub for Web3. So a lot of great developer activity has been happening in Korea, Southeast Asia, Taiwan. I think that in a 100-year landscape, um, developer activity will be pretty distributed, but capital will always remain sticky in the United States. Like the biggest protocols will be based in the United States. The best projects will probably come from the United States ecosystem. That's just how tech is typically work, from like New York, SF, to be these big hubs. But I think the biggest consumer apps and biggest consumer app developers will come from Asia. For example, Korea has done a great job in terms of leveraging blockchain for digital collectibles. They actually use NFTs. In America, NFTs are like a monkey that is worth $100,000 and people are like, what is that? In Korea, it's actually used for ticketing. It's used for collectibles for fans. It's used sometimes like meals and used in day-to-day life. Singapore has Web3 built into the Grab app itself, which is like their super app for any Ubers, for any pickups. And in terms of adoption, these are the things that we need. While in the United States, we're battling with government regulations to even like use crypto and use Web3. So my kind of thesis on this is the United States will be the hub for like the blue chip companies, the blue chip builders. But Asia and developing regions like that will be where Web3 is actually adopted.
Oh yeah. Yes. And I think there are like you're building also a subnet on Avalanche. Or yeah. Is it already live?
Yep, it's fully in DevNet,
Okay.
fully. Yep.
And like Avalanche subnets are also getting a lot of adoption from the Asia side. You're building a Ethereum layer 2, but you're also building an Avalanche subnet. So why the Avalanche ecosystem? So what, you briefly described the Avalanche consensus model, and but could you just touch upon that? What attracts you to the Avalanche subnet ecosystem?
It's more so on the Subnet consensus. So what people don't realize is the subnet is actually completely separate from the primary chain or the C chain in this case. So the beauty of the Avalanche architecture is that you have the C chain, which is where all the activity you're seeing right now is, but it's still technically a subnet itself. The 100-year vision for Avalanche is 1,000 plus blockchains, app chains with their own use cases, with their own environments. Some of these subnets are gaming subnets. So some of the biggest games like Shrapnel, Gunzilla are leveraging Avalanche subnets because it's the easiest way to spin up your own custom blockchains and have your own custom gas rules, have your own custom VMs. It's very developer friendly for these games. There's also a lot of consumer apps. So SK Planet has their own subnet where there's 100,000 plus KYC users leveraging collectibles, and they've done a really good job of penetrating Korea in the market. From infrastructure point of view, what's really interesting is Avalanche and Snowman Consensus is the best way to bootstrap validators and incentivize people to run their own Node3 network. So for our sequencing unit, if we were to use any other consensus model, we need to recruit the validators. We need to download the hardware. We need to download the software. It's a very large overhead for validators, as well as there's not a lot of infrastructure built. There's a lot of documentation that needs to go into that work. So any layer 1, layer 2 builder that we talk to can probably resonate with the pains of onboarding validators. The benefit of coming from the Snowman consensus is we have our validators given to us. It's the existing Snowman validators, which is like 1,500 right now. We can bootstrap 100 of them. Say you stake the native token, you participate in Sigma network, you can run the lightweight consensus on your laptop so anyone can participate. And it's very low barriers to entry to participate in the network. So with that in mind, Snowman is the most decentralized and one of the quickest consensus models on the market. Which is very useful for us because A, we have a next gen VM, so need high throughput capacities for Snowman. And then B, we can have cool token models where you can stake the native token, participate in sequencing, which wouldn't really be possible in other ecosystems. Maybe Cosmos would enable this, but besides that, probably not.
Does like M1 chain, do you call it like M1 on Ethereum side and also on Avalanche side?
M1 is on the Avalanche side, and then M2 is the Ethereum wallet.
Does it have the same kind of token?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. And what kind of activity are you seeing on both of these chains? Is it different or almost the same, like types of dApps and use cases?
So what we're seeing is like, obviously you're focusing on launching a core DeFi ecosystem right now. So that's the main focus at the moment. Getting lending protocols, getting stable swaps, getting DEXs, building a core DeFi system. But really the 6 to 12 month landscape is attracting consumer apps. The benefit of Move obviously is derived from Facebook, the biggest consumer app in space. How can we get not a friend tech, but a different version of social apps using the chain, gaming apps? They can leverage the high throughput capacities as well as dynamic NFTs, which is a very cool concept built by the Move folks, which typically when you're in a game and you're minting millions of NFTs, if mint and burn NFTs constantly, which can clog up a chain and boost stake congestion. With Move, essentially, you have dynamic NFTs, so you can swap out traits at will. So if you kill 1,000 zombies, you can swap out the mag, swap out the caliber, do that within the gun itself, the traits of a smart contract. So yeah, short term, attracting DeFi, providing better, secure vaults for users, going whole DeFi insurance route. And then long term, it's consumer and gaming approach.
And where do you see this industry moving short term, medium term, and 15 years? Where do you see this space moving to?
I think in a 15-year landscape, which is long crypto terms at the moment, I think everyone uses blockchains without them noticing it. So Google Drive, like IPFS, would be a much better solution in theory. And because you have decentralized storage, you're not like giving up sovereignty of your files and your data storage to Google and who can censor it and move it. We're seeing a lot of like AI protocols come up recently that are focused on decentralized AI compute. So you're not relied on Microsoft, you're not relying on Google. Instead, you can have your own off-chain compute for any AI proving mechanisms. I think blockchain can weave itself into every sector of today's landscape, and we're seeing a lot of use cases come up. It's taking time for adoption, obviously, because market sentiment and lack of better consumer tooling. But in this role where wallets abstracted, chains abstracted, there's not 900 billion chains with different bridging components that are pretty terrible to use. Once that's all abstracted away, we can finally bring it to these consumer apps, and everyday users will use blockchains without them noticing it. At the end of the day, a blockchain is a superior database that can host a lot of information on an open source public ledger. So think of it like Google Sheets, Amazon, Google Drive on steroids. And there's 50 ways to bring it to mass adoption. So that's kind of my thesis.
Okay. This is what I ask every builder. If someone who's listening and aspires to be an entrepreneur, start something in the blockchain space, what advice would you give them?
Get ready to fail. It's going to be very difficult, especially when you're starting. You're going to have to pivot a lot of thoughts of like people saying you're not smart enough, you're not good enough, the ideas would make sense. And I think the first 6 months is where most builders probably quit or like leave or don't like persevere. You have to be willing to kind of go with the flow, take your like damages, take your blows, and keep sticking through it. Some of our earliest investors and advisors kept advising us, kept strong. So find a good support group that really believes in you, believes in yourself as like the founder. The product and idea will develop over months and years, but really believe yourself in the founder and get ready for what's about to come.
Okay, great. If someone wants to reach out to you, reach out to Movement Labs, how can they do that?
Yeah, my personal Twitter is at Rushi Manche, and the movement Twitter is at Movement Labs XYZ.
Okay, cool. It was a pleasure to talk to you, man. Rushi, this was amazing conversation, and I wish you all the best with the Movement Labs and the further development, and looking forward to chat with you again.
Thanks for having me, man. Appreciate the time.
Thanks for tuning in. If you are keen on getting deeper insights about Web3 tech, our newsletter, Just the Metrics, is just what you need. It's packed with valuable information, and it's completely free. You can subscribe by clicking the link in the video description. It's a great way to keep up with the latest in the Web3 space straight to your inbox. And before you go, please hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more updates and insights. Your support is what keeps these videos coming. So see you in the next video.